Welcome back to Little House on Laurel. I'm Talia. Today I'm making sourdough blueberry lemon scones. They combine tangy sourdough with fresh blueberries and a hint of lemon, and then they're topped with cream and coarse sugar for an unforgettable baked pastry. They have just the right amount of sweetness, so they're perfect for breakfast or even afternoon tea. If you've been watching my other videos, you know that I love picking fresh blueberries every summer with our family. I already have several blueberry recipes for you. I have my blueberry sourdough bread with streusel topping, as well as a recipe for naturally sweetened coconut milk blueberry ice cream. I'll link to those in the description box for you. But our new favorite is the sourdough blueberry lemon scones. My husband is a huge blueberry scone fan, and I have been making blueberry scones for years, but I just made this new recipe recently, and we love it because the sourdough adds a depth of flavor that you just can't get without it. It's the perfect backdrop for fresh blueberries that are bursting with sweetness. Not only do we love fresh blueberries, but we also love fresh cherries, peaches, apples, you name it. We love using fresh produce in the summer. We use them to make delicious breakfasts, snacks, and desserts. And using produce that's in season is really important to me for several reasons. One reason is that you can't beat the flavor of fresh produce straight from your garden or from a farmer's market or just from your local farmer. Have you ever eaten a ripe tomato just off the vine? Compare that to a tomato that you eat from the grocery store in the middle of winter, which has absolutely no flavor. So I'm sure if you've had that experience, you understand what I mean, because the contrast is very obvious. Another important reason to eat fruit or vegetables in season is that seasonal produce has time to ripen on the vine naturally, and it's harvested at its peak, so it contains more nutrients and antioxidants, which is better for our health. Even if you're taking that fresh produce and you're canning it or freezing it, you're still going to have a higher amount of nutrients in your food than you would if you bought that fresh from the grocery store in the winter, because it's had to travel long distances to get to where you are. And the longer that produce has been off of the vine, the more nutrients it will lose. Another great thing about eating produce in season is that it's what nature intended for us. It provides us with the types of nutrients that we need for that particular season. For instance, in the summer, we have watermelon and berries and foods with a lot of water that can help to keep us hydrated. Now, in the fall and winter, when it starts to get cold and there's more chance for illness, there are a lot of foods that are rich in vitamin C, which can help to combat cold and flu. Foods like citrus fruit, if that's something that grows in your area of the country, pumpkins, other types of squash like butternut squash and acorn squash, as well as kale. Those are all high in vitamin C. And another great benefit of eating in season is that you can keep things more local, which is better for your community and for the environment. If you're supporting your local farmers by buying their produce, and buying less products that have to be transported to your area from another area, then that's better off for our environment. To make these sourdough blueberry lemon scones, you will need 1 3/4 cups of flour, 1/3 cup of sugar, 1 tablespoon baking powder, 6 tablespoons of cold butter, 1 1/2 cups of fresh blueberries washed, 1 teaspoon of grated lemon zest, 1/4 cup of heavy cream plus more for brushing the tops of the scones before baking, 1/2 cup of sourdough discard, and 1 egg. You'll also want coarse sugar for topping your scones, or you can use more of the regular cane sugar if you don't have that. There's a couple of questions that people have about making scones. One of them is they want to know if they can substitute milk for the heavy cream if they don't have heavy cream on hand. And the answer is yes, you can. You will need to use a little bit less milk than you would heavy cream, and then add in some butter to replace the fat that is lost by not using heavy cream. So for example, for my recipe, for the 1/4 cup of heavy cream, You would substitute it with 2 tablespoons of milk and 2 more tablespoons of cold butter. Another question people have is about chilling scones before baking. There are many recipes that advise you to put your scone dough into the refrigerator for a resting period before baking. This is supposed to help relax the gluten a little bit and also to prevent the scones from spreading and flattening during baking. You can do this step if you'd like. I have not chilled my scone dough and I've never had a problem with it spreading and becoming flat during baking. And another question is, can you over knead scone dough? Yes, you can over knead it. This is why after you use a fork or a spoon to stir the dough, once it starts to come together, you're going to put it on a floured surface and you only want to fold it over enough just until it's mixed. It's okay if you see clumps of butter in there still. That's actually going to be a good thing when it bakes because you'll have a flakier texture. If you over knead the dough, then your scones are going to be dense and chewy, which you don't want. You want them to be light and flaky. Now this is a sourdough discard recipe, but that doesn't mean you can't use active sourdough starter. It just means that you don't need to because the scones will still rise without an active starter because we're using baking powder in this recipe. An important key to making these scones is that you need to use cold ingredients. The butter needs to be cold straight out of the refrigerator. You don't want to soften it at all. The heavy cream should be cold and the eggs should be cold. You can also substitute frozen blueberries for the fresh blueberries. However, just make sure that you don't let them thaw because if you do, they will bleed into the dough. We're ready to get started baking our sourdough blueberry lemon scones. Going to start by preheating the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And you'll want to line your baking sheet with parchment paper. So in the large bowl, we're going to mix together the 1 3/4 cup of flour, one-third cup of sugar, and 1 tablespoon of baking powder. I'm going to cut these 6 tablespoons of butter into pieces, and then I will be cutting the butter into the rest of the dry ingredients. And you want to do that until the largest pieces are the size of peas. All right, now we're going to stir in the 1 1/2 cups of blueberries and 1 teaspoon of lemon zest. In the small bowl, we're going to add 1/4 cup of cream, 1/2 cup of sourdough discard, and 1 large egg. Now we're going to whisk these ingredients until well mixed. We're going to pour the wet ingredients into the dry ingredients in the bowl. And then I'm going to mix it just until it starts to come together. Once the dough starts to come together, you can use a countertop like me or just a baking mat. Pour it out onto the flour. We're going to do that by folding it over a couple of times. So this is the part that's considered in the dough. Really close. Just trying to get rid of the crumbly parts. I'm going to leave a little bit of that extra flour. Okay. This is good. Okay. Got it into a nice mound. You're going to flatten it. You want to shape it into a square with your hands, and then at the same time, flatten it to about 1.5 inches thick. Okay, now that we have our square, we can cut it into 4 smaller squares. And you'll cut each smaller square into half to make 8 triangles. And then we'll place each scone separately onto the baking sheet. Now we're ready to brush the tops of our scone dough with heavy cream. I have some coarse sanding sugar that I like to use. And then we will put these in the oven to bake. You want to bake them for 18 to 20 minutes or until they're golden brown on top. Once done baking, you'll transfer them from the baking sheet to a baker to cool. I've just removed the blueberry scones from the oven, so I'm going to put them on this rack to cool. As you can see, these don't flatten at all. At least they haven't for me. So hopefully these work out really well for you. I hope you and your family enjoy these sourdough blueberry lemon scones. I'd love if you left me a comment and let me know if you liked them. In the description box, I'll also have links to other videos where I use farm fresh, in-season produce from the summer. So I hope you'll take a look at that, and I would love it if you came back again soon. I create new content every week with farm fresh recipes and simple living ideas to help you on your journey to a healthy and happy home. I'll see you soon. I know some of you will want to know how to make these scones fermented, which means letting the sourdough ferment all of the flour that's in this recipe so it's more easily digested. If you want to do that, it will of course take longer than this recipe, but the directions are very close to the same. You'll mix the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients separately and then mix them together just as I showed you. But when you start to mix the dough and it's beginning to come together, and you stop before you put the dough onto a floured surface and knead it, you're going to instead cover the bowl with plastic wrap it into the refrigerator. You can't leave it out on the counter to ferment because it has an egg and heavy cream in it. But you'll place it into the refrigerator to ferment, and you can leave that in there up to 3 days. It really depends on how much you would like your dough to ferment. Keep in mind that when you're fermenting dough in the refrigerator, it's going to be a lot slower process than if you were fermenting it out on the countertop. This is just because the sourdough tends to slow way down and not be as active when it's cold. Okay, so after you remove your scone dough from the refrigerator, after fermenting, you'll heat it a few times and then shape the dough, cut it into 4 squares and into 8 triangles, and go from there.